In this video, I'm going to be looking at the three main reasons that your tracks get rejected by publishers and or production music libraries. So we're talking about sync, and we're talking about the people who should be taking your music, putting it to picture, and hopefully earning you loads of money in the form of passive income. So whether you are a composer or producer writing to brief, or you're an artist or band hoping to get your music picked up, the principles I'm about to cover are exactly the same. I'm also going to have a little look at two things you can do to make your MIDI sound a bit more realistic. I'm going to have a look at what you can do if you feel that your mixes are what's letting your productions down. And I'm also going to share with you one little secret that I've been using for about the last 10-11 years that I think not only helps my music get picked, but also get used as much as humanly possible. My name's Jim Hustwit from Lark Music. I am a music producer and composer, and I have written production music or library music for most of the major libraries, including Universal, EMI and BMG. But I also work as a consultant for a US publisher, and I run a writers' circle, and as such I receive a lot of submissions for the library, and I tend to hear the same mistakes being made over and over again. So my intention with this video is to highlight what those mistakes are so that you can avoid making them going forward, and hopefully then get your music synced as much as humanly possible and earn loads of money in the process. I am going to be posting quite a few videos on the subject of production music and music for sync, so if you're interested, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so that you get an update every time I post a new video. As an aside, if you are interested in writing production music for a new library and you'd like to get involved with our writers circle, then I'll include a link in the description below with details on how to do so. One of the main problems I see time and time again with submissions for production music or people who want their music to be synced is the structure is not right. You have to think differently when you're writing music for picture than you do if you're writing music for commercial release or just for fun. So when you're writing music to picture or for sync, you have to think about who's using the music, and the most important person by far is the video editor, the person who is cutting up the visuals. They are using visuals to tell a story. They have a narrative. Ultimately, your music is to help them tell that story and serve that visual narrative. The easier it is to use your music and the easier it is to tell their story with your music, the more likely your music is to get used. So whether you're writing music specifically for use in picture or you're an artist and band and you're writing music that you hope to get synced, there are similar principles in the writing of the music. Generally, there are three working parts. As I'm from a songwriting background, I like to think about it in terms of a verse and a chorus. My verse is a journey and my chorus is a destination. But similarly, if you're talking A-B section, A is the journey, the verse, B is the chorus or the destination. So on my journey, I want it to be a journey of excitement. I want it to be building the tension. I want a sense of excitement and anticipation as to where I'm going. I'm heading towards my destination. Let's say we're going on holiday to Disneyland or Bognor Regis. But there's a sense of excitement and anticipation, and that should build and grow throughout the verse, throughout that first section, because we are building and creating a sense of excitement, and that should constantly be growing and building. There's obviously different ways you can do this with building tension and then releasing it, and that's a big subject for a different day. But this is what we're doing with that first section. Then we eventually arrive at our destination. We should build into it and really have a sense of energy being thrown into this our destination or our chorus. And it should feel good. It should feel like we're resolved. It should feel comfortable, harmonically speaking, rhythmically speaking. It should feel like the main section, the main event, and this is where we feel relaxed and are most comfortable. So there we go, we've got a journey, we've got a destination. Now with traditional songwriting, we could then go into verse 2. If we are going to go into verse 2, generally verse 2 is a shortened version of verse 1, but it also needs to be sufficiently different to verse 1. You cannot just copy and paste verse 1 into verse 2. Think of it from an editor's perspective. If they've got verse 1 and verse 2 is exactly the same, it's redundant. They've got everything they need here in verse 1. So verse 2 needs to be a development and sufficiently developed beyond verse 1 to be of use for the editors so that they can tell a different story or tell the same story in a slightly different way. For example, if the first verse doesn't have drums in, the second section does have drums in, but there's also a sense of build and growth. In fact, throughout the piece of music, you need to constantly keep that sense of development and growth going. You can't go off and meander around and sort of willy-nilly and have long intros and blah, blah, blah. It has to be, and it might feel fairly formulaic, but the formula exists for a reason because it works time and time again. You listen to any major track that gets released, there is a certain formula and structure to it, and similarly with production music, you're following a similar formula and structure. Let's say that we don't actually need a verse 2 and we feel that we've achieved everything we needed to in verse 1. So this would be a good time to have a middle 8. Now, in traditional songwriting, the middle 8 is a departure from the rest of the track. So usually harmonically a bit of a departure, maybe rhythmically. It just feels a little bit different to everything that's come before. Sufficiently familiar for it to be a part of the same song and probably going to be in the same key, but also different, a different journey, a slightly different area. And you have to think in terms of an editor. Why is this good? Because as an editor, if you're telling a story and you've got a narrative, the chances are there's going to be at some point a shift in gear, a shift in mood, a shift in tension. That middle section, that middle 8 can help provide that. And that's something that I always build into my my production music tracks is some kind of departure, because I think as an editor it's invaluable. Might not use it, but it's great to have it. And again, remember, we're talking about increments. You have to make this as useful as possible. It's about making your track utilitarian. Useful. So then we've come out of our middle 8, and generally we'll come back into the chorus, because once we've gone away, when we come back, we're happy to be back. It feels again like visiting an old friend. Again, if we're coming back into our chorus, it has to be sufficiently different from chorus 1 to be of value, to be usable by the editor. If again, it's a copy and paste, it serves no purpose. I've got chorus 1 here, why do I need chorus 2? So again, it's a development. And this is what's really important, is throughout this structure, the song needs to be evolving and growing. At no point should you sort of like just be regressing to what it was before or dropping down in energy. It's keeping that energy going and keeping it building to a sort of final climax. And to that end, it's always good practice to sort of have like a big finale, because if chorus 1 is kind of like our sort of like slightly more stripped back version, chorus 2 can be, you know, the big epic finale where the kitchen sink is thrown in and everything's incredible. But again, it gives an editor choices. Do I want the big sort of firework display, or do I want sort of like a more, you know, low-key trip to the pub? I'll also throw in at this point just the idea of an epilogue and a prologue. This, I think, probably comes from slightly more from a trailer music thing, but a prologue is basically a small, if you've got let's say, for example, a sort of melodic motif within your track, a prologue would allude to that melodic motif right at the beginning, just to sort of give yourself a taste of it, so that when it does come in the chorus, it's not the first time we're hearing it. It's there. It's familiar already. And similarly, an epilogue would be after the big finale. You would then maybe have a little suggestion of that same motif again. It's usually kind of the part of the trailer where the sort of like the credits come up at the end. But it's useful to have in. It's not a must, but think about a prologue and an epilogue. So yeah. Structure, is it usable? Think about whether or not an editor can easily use your track to serve his or her needs. Another thing to mention here again, which is very useful in trailer music, but is generally across the board is very useful, is having small drops between sections or during sections, because it provides a clear edit point for the editor to edit to. I think it's very useful because it's a great way to sort of create tension and then release it. But you have to just do it sparingly and make sure that you're not killing the sort of momentum or energy of the track with them. But think in terms of builds. It can be a very useful tool. So the second reason that most tracks get rejected is because the idea is not relevant. Ask yourself the question, is my track relevant to this brief? So if the brief is for something positive and uplifting, are we predominantly in a major key or a minor key? Because a minor key generally takes us into a slightly darker, more brooding area of town. But actually what we're wanting is a more optimistic and uplifting area. So be rigorous. And I get it. You've got a hard drive full of music for which you've never found a home. A brief comes through and you sort of think, I wonder if I can shoehorn in one of those tracks from this brief. But unless those tracks are absolutely on money and on brief, don't send them. It's not worth it. Believe me, I've been there, I've done it, and it does not win you any favours. So if you're being asked for a sort of uplifting piece of power pop, don't send an orchestral track. And similarly, if you're being asked for sort of like epic trailer music, don't send them a 70s funk track. It seems obvious, and it is obvious, but just be rigorous in your approach to what you send. Okay, so the third and final reason that tracks get rejected is because the production or the mix are not up to scratch. So as a modern composer, unfortunately it's not enough to just be a great writer. You also have to be a great producer, you also have to be a great mix engineer, and sometimes you have to be an incredible mastering engineer. 10, 15 years ago, you used to be able to get away with sending in tracks which sounded a little bit more in the box, and the the quality bar was a bit lower, but unfortunately in modern times, certainly the big libraries, they want stuff which sounds incredibly close to a commercial release. So they want stuff that sounds like it was recorded at Abbey Road or could be released by a major artist. This means that unfortunately the odds are stacked against us if we don't have loads of experience and don't have big budgets. One thing I will say is that the bar is very high for the likes of Universal and EMI and BMG. Royalty-free libraries like Audio Jungle, whilst probably not going to be generating the same returns, is actually a good place to start and cut your teeth because the quality bar is a little bit lower. So bear that in mind as you're applying for libraries. So this poses a problem because obviously if we're doing things in the box, we want them to sound as real as possible. Now the problem is with MIDI and samples, even though they are very good now and there's some incredible string libraries out there and things like that, generally it's a bit like CGI. Even though it looks very real, you know it's not. And I think the listener subconsciously, even though it sounds great, there's something they know on some level that it's not actually real. So we're faced with the challenges, okay, we're using MIDI, we need to make it sound as real as possible. Two little tricks I'm going to give you which I think help in a big way. First of all, MIDI samples are generally recorded very dry and very up close. Now you think about any sound that you listen to in the real world, you hardly ever hear it without some kind of reverb on. Even in the street there is a level of reverb which creates a sort of sense of space and realness. So a little tip I would offer is, with a MIDI sample, add a bit of reverb, but a very small ambience, so somewhere between 0.1 and 0.6 millisecond reverb, because what that does is, first of all, it pushes it back away from the microphone a bit, but it also creates a sense of space, which tricks the ear into thinking that the sound is actually more real than it actually is. Another thing you can use is distortion. So MIDI samples are generally very pure and very clean, and when people are sampling things, they want it to sound as pure as possible, and then they end up processing it so it sounds compressed and nice. However, again, there is a certain something in the human psyche whereby we actually like those little imperfections. Look at all the analog gear that plugins are recreating today. They're all creating analog gear, and that analog gear, the reason we like it is because it imparts small imperfections on the sound, like harmonic distortion, which we actually really like. So use a distortion plugin on MIDI samples to just roughen them up a bit and make them feel a little bit more natural and real world, because too pure, nobody wants that. Make it a bit dirty. But here's an idea that I employed to good effect when I was sort of starting out is, I'm spending most of my time arranging and producing and writing music. So I used to outsource my mixes, because that meant that I had a fresh perspective on the music, which after several days of writing can be absolutely invaluable. But it also meant I was handing the track over to someone who mixes on a daily basis, and they are specialists in what they do. So it can be an option. If you're not finding your tracks aren't getting accepted and you don't have the time to dedicate to mixing, think about outsourcing. Maybe you're paying the mix engineer, or maybe that you're cutting them in on a bit of the songwriting, and hopefully with the promise of them receiving some royalties further down the line. If you faced any particular issues with production music libraries and getting tracks accepted that you would like me to sort of address or talk about, then let me know in the comments below. I will always reply to all comments, and if enough people sort of have a similar problem, then I may even do a video on it. So as promised, I'm going to talk about the little trick that I've been using for the past 10 years or so to make sure my tracks get accepted but also get used as often as possible. Now, you remember in the structure I talked about you don't need a long intro. In fact, you should positively avoid a long intro. Think about it like this. The music supervisors, the producers, the editors will probably initially only listen to the first 5 to 10 seconds of your track. If you waste that time with a really long ambient intro where nothing happens, you may lose them forever. You need to grab their attention quickly and in the first few seconds in order to stand a chance of your track being picked and then used. So, two options. One, start with the chorus. Think about Ain't No Sunshine When She's Gone, like by Bill Withers. It starts with the chorus. It establishes that killer, beautiful line and melody right at the beginning. So you know where you are with it, you know you're in good stead. Similarly, David Bowie, Let's Dance. It starts with a really strong hook. Let's dance. And again, you know where you are with it, and it establishes it early on. So if that's a prerequisite for the track that they're looking for, something to do with dancing, boom, you've got their attention immediately. The other thing is to think about hooks. So what do we mean by hook? By hook, we mean a unique sound, a unique texture, a unique melody, something unique which differentiates your track from the others. Think of it like this. If a load of music supervisors sitting round one afternoon, having listened to a load of tracks earlier that day, if they were going to reference your track in conversation, What would they refer to make sure their colleagues understood what they were talking about? What unique part of that track would identify the song that they were talking about if they didn't know the title name or didn't have the track to hand? So think of it like that. Your track has to do something a little bit unique, and that unique hook is what will hopefully at the end of the day clinch the sync. So make sure if you've got a killer hook or you've got a unique texture, you've got that hook, whatever it is, make sure it features in the first 5 to 10 seconds, because that could be the difference between the sync or no sync. One other point to note is that if you have submitted music to a brief and it's been rejected, try and get some candid feedback as to why it was rejected. You might be opening yourself up to hearing something that you don't necessarily want to hear, but it is the only way to learn and to hopefully avoid making the same mistake going forward. Hopefully this has been useful. Thank you very much for listening. If it has been useful and you have got some value out of it, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe button below. It goes a long way to telling YouTube that this video is useful and that other people should hear it. And it also kind of makes me feel a little bit better about myself. If you're feeling particularly crazy, then by all means, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. You can disagree with me, you can agree with me. If you've got another issue that you'd like to throw into the mix, do so. Or if there's any other subjects that you would like me to cover in future videos, again, pop it in the comments below. Thanks very much for listening. Keep making music.